Today we are learning about mindfulness because I don't know about you, but I'm still kind of confused about what exactly it is, why everybody's talking about it so much, and we telling us we got to get mindful. And also, like, what does that mean? How do we do it? So to dig into this very timely topic, because it is seems to be all over the news, and we need it so much in these very challenging times on many fronts, I'm excited to welcome Sunada Takagi. Sunada inspires people to build purpose centered lives through the power of mindfulness. She is a certified instructor of mindfulness based stress reduction, offering public workshops that spark transformational growth. For individual clients, she offers compassionate coaching that supports deep personal exploration and discovery. She is also an ordained Buddhist teacher and leader committed to building thriving spiritual communities. Her life is dedicated to growing an ever widening circle of people living with authenticity, integrity, and kindness.
Well, thank you, Ellen. So, I wanted to talk today about what really is the point of mindfulness. Because, as Ellen said in the introduction, it's all over the place, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding floating around out there. So, let me just dive right in. And, oh, come on. Okay. All right. So, this is a very typical way that people start yoga and meditation, right? You put it on your to-do list, you check it off when you've done it every day, done, right? That's how I got started and makes perfect sense because if it's, not a habit, you want to just keep reminding yourself to do it. So, of course, it's a good idea to start that way. But unfortunately, if you keep doing it that way, it kind of turns into a dry, stale routine, and we kind of lose the thread and becomes a chore, and you kind of forget, like, why am I doing this, right? Because you just kind of check it off every day and then you just go on, right? So, yeah, so what went wrong? What do we do? What I want to talk about today is that mindfulness is not something to do, okay? Mindfulness is really at its core, mindfulness is awareness. It's something we're all born with. You already know how to do it. If you're listening to my voice and watching the screen, you are aware, right? As long as you're conscious and awake, you are aware. Um, Animals and babies know how to do it instinctively. We're all born knowing how to do it. It's not anything that you have to be trained how to do it. But, oops, sorry, bang into my microphone. But we do lose touch with it, right? We just it kind of gets lost in the busyness of our everyday lives. Certainly the way that we're educated in our schooling system, it's all about ideas and juggling concepts in our heads, and this whole idea of being present and paying attention to what's going on right now is not anything that we get taught in school. Our culture is all about looking ahead to something bigger and better out there so that we'll buy more stuff. So we spend so little of our time actually being here and alive to our own lives. It's just been trained out of us. So that's why it we feel like we have to do mindfulness, do meditation to kind of remember how to do it. Um, but okay, so I just want to sort of reframe that whole process a little bit with what I'm talking about today. And just as a side note, let me mention that I want to distinguish between mindfulness and meditation because they're not synonymous. So, what I'm talking about is mindfulness, which is this quality of mind. that awareness, that ability to be present and paying attention to what's going on. That's a state of mind. And meditation is the formal practice that we do to help us to reconnect with that state of mind. Okay, so that's the distinction that I'm making between those two things. So I'm going to stop my screen share for just a moment because I would like to lead you through a really short meditation or a mindfulness exercise to illustrate what I mean by, um, um, well, practicing mindfulness, being mindful, and not making it something to do. All right. So it'll probably only be, 5 or so minutes. It won't be very long, maybe 10 at the most. So I'd like you to start with your eyes open and just uh, cast your eyes directly in front of what you're looking at. It's probably some form of screen you're looking at, but look around and imagine that your eyes are like a camera lens. And as you know, cameras don't go out and look for information. They're not trying to do something with what's out there. You just allow these visual images, stimulation to land on your eyes. So just try that for a moment and take in whatever is in front of you right now. And let's just be curious about what's out there. So there are colors, shapes, textures. And I would bet that you're noticing details right now that you hadn't noticed until now. Yeah. So you are being mindful, you are being aware of what's here right now. Now let's turn that sensibility over to your hearing. So just imagine, and you can close your eyes if that helps. Let's turn that camera lens analogy to your hearing, your sense of hearing, and allow the sounds coming into your ears to just land there. So I hear the fan of my heater rumbling. You're hearing my voice. Yeah. And I imagine that your mind is going, ah, that's Sunada's voice, or that's a fan, right? Those are labels. Nothing wrong with labeling what you're hearing, but let's just remember that there's a difference between what you're actually hearing and what you label them. So the label is a thought. Okay. Again, nothing wrong with labeling or thinking. Let's just notice that distinction between what you're actually experiencing and what you're thinking. Again, we're just being curious about what's passing through our ears. Okay, now let's turn your camera lens sensibility to your body. What are you feeling in your body? Like the chair underneath you, maybe feeling the clothing on your skin, your feet on the floor perhaps. What do you notice? Again, just being curious. And again, distinguish between what I'm actually experiencing through my sense of the body versus your mind going, oh, that's a chair, right? And then notice your breathing. And how do you know you're breathing right now? Apart from our thinking that, oh, I am breathing, what is actually going on? movement in the body. Does it feel good? Not so good? Right? There's no right or wrong about this. It just is. Just noticing. Okay, so we'll stop here so you can come back, rejoin us. So that was a very brief mindfulness experience. I won't call it a meditation. I suppose you could. Meditation isn't about just putting time on the clock and sitting there and supposedly watching your breath for 20 minutes and you're kind of watching your watch the whole time. That's not really going to get you. I mean, it helps, I suppose, but you're kind of missing the main point of why we do this. And the more that you can bring that kind of sensibility of really tuning into what's coming in through your five senses and your mind also, because in Buddhism, actually, the mind is considered the sixth sense. It's one of the input devices, if you will, that we have. The more we can be tuned into what's coming in to our experience, the more we are actually in tune with what's really going on. Right? So mindfulness isn't something to do, and you got a taste of what it is. Alternatively, if it isn't something to do, right? It's really being present to your senses. So I want to talk today about the three gifts of mindfulness, and I call them gifts. Calling them benefits just makes it sound like too much of a scientific thing. And I suppose it is, but I call them gifts because if we really approach mindfulness with that sort of generous receiving of our experience state of mind, these three things just kind of come to us naturally and organically. And that's why I call them gifts, because these insights just start to come for us in a way that's really enriching. So the three gifts that I want to talk about, and my whole presentation today is structured around this. So the first one is self-care. The second one is self-development. And the third is self-transcendence. And I will talk more specifically about what I mean by each one of these as we go along. But these three kind of have a progression to them that they kind of unfold in that sort of order, and they kind of grow in increasing complexity and meaning as well as we move through them. So let me talk about each of these one at a time. So the first gift is self-care. So when we slow down and start to pay attention to the details of our life, details meaning, as Sarah was referring to, kind of paying attention to what's going on in your body, and we begin to sense what feels good to us or what doesn't feel good to us, and all that stuff starts to arise more naturally for us. And well, it kind of sounds obvious, but a lot of the things that are happening in our bodies just kind of are flying beneath the radar, and we may not notice until we pause long enough to notice. So let me take a little bit of a side trip here to talk about some of the biological foundations of stress. There's a lot of information on this slide, but really the key things that I'd like you to remember is that there's a lion on the right and a woman relaxing on the beach on the left, okay? So there's the sympathetic nervous system, which is basically our fight or flight mechanism, that whenever we feel like we are in danger, like if there's a lion chasing us, our bodies are going to go into hyperactive mode to try and get the hell out of there. Obviously, that's something that's evolutionarily built right into us. It's a necessary part of our biology. And you can see in this chart that there are some um, physiological changes that happen when we're experiencing that kind of reaction. Everything is being focused on the body just revving up so that we can run and escape from danger. And on the other side, on the left side of the screen, you're seeing the parasympathetic nervous system, which is really the opposite of being chased by a lion. So things like our heart rate decreasing and our digestive system coming back online, all these kinds of things are really more when our body is in a state of relaxation and homeostasis. Okay, so our system was designed so that the sympathetic nervous system kicks in an urgent, quick hit sort of situation where we just need to run like hell to get out of danger. And then when things are back down to normal again, we go back to the parasympathetic system and everything calms back down. That's the way the system was designed to work. Unfortunately, in our modern um, 20th, 21st century lives, well, we don't have lions chasing us, but we certainly do have stress. And it tends to be a very different kind of stress. It tends to be more emotional and psychological. And it may not be as acute as having a lion chasing us down. It may be at a lower level, lower pitch, but it's constant, right? We're living with it all the time. Like you're out of work or you're dealing with some medical issues that are scary. That's the kind of thing that there's war in Ukraine, right? I mean, there are things that are sort of there underlying our awareness all the time. And so it's like our sympathetic nervous system is always a little bit on alert. Um, and that's not healthy, right? So, as far as our biology is concerned, it doesn't care whether we're being chased by a lion or we're worried about whether or not our next paycheck is going to come in. Our body is going to respond in the same way. And, um, you know, I was reading the other day that some ridiculous high percentage of our chronic illnesses in the world, it was like 80%, have stress as one of its underlying causes, right? So this is what we're living with. Most of us are living with this. So what do? We can't run away from the fact that we live in a stressful kind of a life. Um, so Sarah, you will recognize this. We did this in my class. So I'm going to introduce to you this acronym STOP. And this is a really short, simple meditation, if you will, that you can do anywhere. And it only takes one breath to do it. So the STOP, each letter stands for something, and it's a step in the process. So the S stands for stop. T, take a breath. So you're in the middle of a stressful situation, just pause. Take one mindful breath. The O stands for observe. So pay attention to what's happening in your body and kind of re-ground yourself. And it only after you've kind of found your feet under you, then you can proceed with whatever it is you're doing. So I'm sure you do this all the time, when you realize that you're about to send a flaming email and you decide, maybe I better stop and save it in my draft folder before I send it. Your better angels kind of step in and say, maybe I better stop. You just did the stop routine, right? You just paused and said, I think I better think this over before I do this, rather than just sailing through, um, swept away by your emotions or your thoughts. You just paused and kind of regained your sensibilities before you moved on. So that's what this is all about. Even if you don't have time to do a full meditation, you can do a one breath stop. Right? So that's what this um, practice can help us do. That when we are caught up in our sympathetic nervous system and the body thinks there's a lion chasing after us, but actually we're just concerned about finding a job, you can stop, take a breath, observe. It's like, oh, I'm getting anxious, but actually right now there's nothing I can do about it. So I will put that thought aside and proceed with what I was doing. And I'll drop my shoulders and I'll take a deep breath, right? So that's what we can do when we feel ourselves getting stressed. So I wanted to tell a story of Mark, who is one of my students, and how he used stop recently. So about a month ago here in Boston, we had a few days where the temperatures never got above single digits, and he commutes to work by bus, standing outside in the cold streets, waiting for the bus to come. And he was obviously he was really cold, and he looked like this guy in the cartoon here. He was shivering, and he was hunched over, and his shoulders were up to his ears, and he was also anxious about getting to work on time because he was really busy, and so he was just kind of all revved up waiting for the bus to come. And then he paused and did that stop. And he also paused long enough to realize, to see the distinction between all that worrying he was doing about, the anxiety about work. And he also realized that he was circling round and round, thinking about how cold he really is, when he actually relaxed his shoulders and felt the temperature. It wasn't as bad as he thought it was. He thought it was. And, he realized, well, the bus is running late. It's cold. There's nothing I can do about it. I don't need to have my shoulders up here and make things worse for myself. I'm just going to stand here, breathe, and be cold. And he was a lot less anxious as a result of that. So, this is an instance of how the STOP acronym really helped him in terms of self care. That if we can just pause and tune into our bodies, we're going to naturally want to do something that's going to be in our interest to feel better. And it's usually when we're just getting totally engulfed in our thinking, typically anxiety and worry is one of them. Um, it just takes us away from remembering what it's like to take care of ourselves. So this is just a really simple way that being mindful in the way that we did in that brief exercise can help us to take care of ourselves better. So the motto here is, oops, come back. Don't believe everything you think. Right? We get really caught up in everything we think. And that's one of the ways that we can use the stop as well. It's like, is this thought for real? Is this really what's going on? Is it helping me to be thinking this? All right. So that's self-care, just bringing that level of awareness into just taking care of ourselves a little bit better.
Can I just ask a question?
Please.
So, I mean, for me, I have found it I always forget how powerful the breath is.
Yeah.
What is it about the breath that just it's a relaxation response? Like it just seems
Yeah.
like taking a few deep breaths on its own
Yes.
seems to really kind of reset things.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's stimulating your parasympathetic nervous system when you take that deep breath. It's that relaxation side of your biology that's getting stimulated just by taking a simple breath. Yeah.
And does it matter how we take the breath? Because, there's all different kinds of in through the nose, out through the nose, in through the nose, out through the mouth, ujjayi breath, or like all these different ones. It's just the oxygenation, the taking in of
Yes.
the, okay.
Yes. I would say the key characteristic is that it's a deep breath that goes as far down into your body as possible, not the kind of,
Right. The halting breath, right.
right, not the anxious high breath that's all the way
Right.
up in your chest, but deep down into your body, and
Mhm.
whether it's through your nose or what really doesn't matter too much.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let me move on to gift number 2. I'm going to go pretty quickly through these because I'm covering a lot of territory. So gift number 2, now we're getting into self-development. So not just taking care of our physical well-being, but now we're talking about our emotional and psychological well-being as well. So, whoops, come back. So I found this cartoon really funny about the internal monologue. I'm just going to read it out loud. You're listening to Internal Monologue FM with me, DJ Subconscious, playing all your thoughts nonstop, uninterrupted, 24 hours a day. From classics like, why did I say that? And the golden oldies like, am I a horrible person? Today's hottest hits. What the hell am I doing with my life? Am I hungry or am I bored? Stay tuned. Isn't that what our minds are like all day long?
Don't stay
Like
tuned.
this, yeah, we may not say stay tuned, but boy, that internal monologue is just going all day long, that narration.
It's exhausting. Just even
It
like
is
it's
exhausting,
yeah, it's exhausting.
and a lot of it is not kind, right? A lot of it is really self-blaming and yeah. So, what ends up happening is that a lot of that self-blaming, kind of self-denigrating thoughts that we have running through our heads all day long ends up being our own self-created cage, right? Especially women. I think a lot of women suffer from the kinds of thoughts that I have scattered on this page. I'm sure you recognize many of them. And it becomes part of our wallpaper, or like the fish doesn't notice the water it's swimming in. It's just become so much a part of our universe that we don't even recognize that they are thoughts. They've just become so ingrained into our worldview that we don't even recognize that we've built a cage around ourselves. Yeah, so I would say this applies to 100% of all human beings. This is not unique to any one person. We all do this to ourselves.
I guess I would be curious to know when kids start doing this, like how early, if
Yeah,
they've found that, because you got to believe babies are not obviously, well, once they're able to think, have independent thought.
right. Yeah, that's an interesting question.
I don't know.
Immediate on some degree.
I'm
No,
sorry, Sarah, what did you say?
I'm just giving my fat-headed opinion.
So-
Did you say immediately?
Immediate to
Immediately.
some degree.
Yeah.
I
They
mean,
have,
it's the
they can't not
stimulus you're
be.
getting, right? From the outside
Right.
is so, I
Sure,
mean, I guess
sure.
unless you're in a,
Right.
you know, black
Unless you
hole
have a
somewhere.
unless you have a goddess for a mother, you know, I think
Sorry.
no,
Even
not to
goddesses make mistakes.
yes, even goddesses make mistakes, you know. Yeah, yeah, we're all human, including mothers. So unfortunately, that's part of
Yes.
being
Oh,
human.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let me tell you my story, a little bit of my story, just to illustrate how I worked with this. This picture was taken about 20 years ago, so I was in my 40s. And you will notice something interesting about this shot is that I'm the only woman in the picture and the only person of color in this picture in a whole sea of white men. This is when I worked in the tech industry, and this was generally my life at the time. And in retrospect, I can honestly say that I was telling myself many of those thoughts from the previous slide about not being good enough and, nobody takes me seriously and, et cetera, et cetera. But my way of dealing with it was to put on this tough masculine front and just keep pushing harder. I was going to prove that I can do this, and that was my shield of not showing my vulnerability or my weaknesses, especially with all of these men. Geez. Um, so my cage was totally invisible to me. I didn't know that I was living in a cage, because I was actually outwardly successful. I was making good money. I was advancing in my career. So what cage? I was perfectly happy, or so I thought. But anyway, my playing tough guy with all these men, and constantly pushing myself, long story short, I just drove myself over a cliff by pushing so hard. So I ended up with a really, really serious repetitive strain injury, which, by the way, I'm still dealing with the repercussions today, literally. Um, and depression and all kinds of chronic conditions, that 20 years later, I'm still dealing with the consequences. And like I said, my cage was totally invisible to me. So, there was nothing that it would have even occurred to me to do anything about until reality just completely bowled me over and said, "Hey, wake up." So I had no choice. And so what did I do? I did my version of this, right? Um, I mean, obviously, this is an oversimplification because you're not going to get through something like that with one single walk through the stop sign. However, doing this incrementally and just pausing and noticing these, I'm starting to notice the stories that I was telling myself, realizing that I'm type A and that, it was my comfort zone to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and thinking, well, why do I feel I have to keep pushing and pushing? You know? So I started small. Like I might question whether I really needed to work this weekend, for example. I have this deadline. Do I have to stay over the weekend to get it done, or can I take the weekend off and put it off till Monday? That's a very simple, direct, practical kind of stop question that I was asking myself. You can start at that level, but one by one, you start peeling away some of these assumptions that you're making about how I have to do things this way. Well, do I really? You know? So thousands or millions of times I did this essentially. Stop, take a breath, question, and then make a decision as to what I'm going to do next. rather than allowing myself to get completely swept away by um, my thoughts and my emotions. Oops, come back. So one by one, started kind of peeling away those bars and finding a way to break free of that cage that I had built for myself. Now, I realize I completely oversimplified this process. It's not, obviously, it's not something that I did overnight. Actually, it took me probably 10 or 15 years. Um, and it's ongoing. It's never done, really. But, we do these little pauses and questioning little things one step at a time, and they start to accumulate. And over time, it really makes a huge difference to start to make one little decision that's different from what we might have done in the past, rather than being completely swept away by my anxiety or my neuroses, and actually pausing and saying, nope, I'm going to take care of myself this time. I'm going to do what I think is right for me rather than what I think I should do. You make, a dozen or 100 or 1,000 of decisions like that, and they really start to add up. And that's where the self-development comes from, is, not shooting for the moon from the very beginning, but one by one making these little incremental choices that point us in the direction of um, choosing from my own wiser self. Okay, let me pause and take a breath and see if there are any comments or questions before I jump into the next.
I mean, I think what you're saying is, it's interesting because 10 to 15 years and still ongoing sounds, like a monumental mountain to climb. At the same time, what I'm hearing you say is, but it's not like you're going, from 0 to 100. It's like all those little decisions are getting you closer to that wiser self. And so it's a journey and it's
It's a
ongoing.
journey.
And
Yeah.
and there is you feel, I'm assuming that it's not like you have to wait till you're at some point to start feeling better. I mean, you feel better, you feel more authentic, more grounded with every little decision you make that is supporting you and your true self, rather than the external demands and pressures
Exactly.
that are eating away
Exactly.
at you.
Yes. And at the time, I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to get there to this point 10 or 15 years from now. I'm not thinking in those terms. I'm
Uh-huh.
just thinking about, I feel crappy right now. I'm really miserable. What can I do to get me out of my misery? And,
Yes.
right?
So it's only looking back that you can see the thread of how you got
Exactly.
here. Yeah,
Exactly.
that makes so much sense to me, because sometimes when you're in it, it's just so hard to see beyond that next,
Yeah. Yeah.
the next small decision that you
Right.
need to
Right.
make.
Yeah, so maybe that's a better way to put it. Maybe I shouldn't have said 10 or 15 years, because then it sort of makes it sound like this huge mountain that you have to climb. And actually, it is just the accumulation of all these little tiny steps that we take that are taking care of my needs right now. And don't worry too much about what's going to happen 10 or 15 years down the road, because it'll happen if we just keep making those wise choices for ourselves in the
And
moment.
and the beautiful thing is that at some point, or maybe at several points along the journey, you look back and you realize how far you've come.
Exactly.
right? I mean,
Yes,
what an amazing realization to see that, and
exactly.
and then you can see the difference. It's just hard in the when you're in it to feel like you're making progress, and then you think, oh, it's this one little thing, like, what is that going to make a difference with, right?
Right,
So
right.
it's yeah, I love
So
that.
that's another thought, isn't it? A self-defeating thought. Oh,
Yes,
this
yes,
isn't going to make any difference. Why should I bother?
right,
Yeah, it's another one of those thoughts versus what's the reality here.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, a friend of mine came up with this great little saying that she says to herself whenever she recognizes one of those unhelpful thoughts come up. She says to herself, "Thank you for sharing,"
Hmm.
which I think is just
Yeah,
great. You
yeah,
know, it's a way of putting a little bit of distance between you and the thought.
acknowledging it but not accepting it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Shall we move on or is there anything else? Yeah. Okay. So now we're on gift number 3, which is self-transcendence. So what exactly do I mean by self-transcendence? It's kind of a big word. This is a definition from the American Psychological Association. It's the state in which an individual is able to look beyond himself or herself and adopt a larger perspective that includes concern for others. Some psychologists maintain that self-transcendence is a central feature of the healthy individual, promoting personal growth and development. So, how does mindfulness bring us this gift of self transcendence? And to illustrate this, I'm going to tell you the story of Kisa Gotami. And this is a story that comes from the Buddhist tradition. Kisa Gotami um, went to the Buddha to ask for help because she was carrying her dead child. You can see this boy with a blue face, totally distraught. And people advised her to go visit the Buddha. Maybe he can help. And so she brought her dead son's body to the Buddha and said, "Please, please, Buddha, please bring him back to life. I can't bear it." And so the Buddha, he didn't say yes or no. He didn't say, "Yes, I can help you." He just said, "Okay, well then do this for me. Go and visit all the households in your village and ask for a mustard seed from each household that has never experienced any death." And so she was elated because, boy, that sounds easy because mustard seeds are plentiful and they're cheap and everybody has them. And boy, oh, this should be a piece of cake. And so she went running out and started knocking on the doors of every single house in the village asking for the mustard seed. And of course, everyone was like happy. "Oh, sure, of course, I'd be happy to give you a mustard seed." And then as she said, "Oh, but one condition, it has to be from a house. Have you had any death in your family?" "Oh, I'm sorry, we have. I can't give you a mustard seed because my mother died the other day, or my grandfather passed away." Or every single household she went to, "Oh, I'd be happy to give you a mustard seed, but I'm sorry. No, we've had somebody die in this family." You can see where this is going. She came back to the Buddha without a single mustard seed. She couldn't find a single family that had never experienced death. And so reality was being put right in front of her face. And when she paused essentially, she did this, right? Oh, come back. Up, come back. She essentially did this. She stopped. She took a breath, noticed the evidence in front of her. She observed the reality. Every single household has had a death. And so she realized, wow, this is not personal. This is not this is not a tragedy that's just happened to me. Well, yes, it is a tragedy, but you know what? Everybody experiences death. It's not just me. And her whole world just expanded from that realization. So this stop, if you will, or just pausing to be mindful and pausing long enough to see the distinction between the thoughts that are completely engulfing me and causing me all kinds of suffering versus the reality that's right here in front of my face. And yeah, just taking in the reality of it and only proceeding from there. So once Gisa Gotami understood what the Buddha was trying to show her, she finally accepted that her child had passed, buried him, and she joined the Buddha's Sangha community. She dedicated her life to becoming a nun within his community and dedicated her life to um, the good of others and to serving others. So mindfulness, when we really pause and pay attention to not just my own stuff, but my way of relating to the world around me and my people around and the people around me, we start to realize, we start to see an even bigger picture of what the reality of our universe is. And here is an illustration of kind of the world that we're living in right now. It's everything is us and them, right and wrong. You're on my side, you're not on my side. And this is a quote from Carl Sagan. He said this back in 1994, and boy, does it still apply today. There's perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. Because what he was trying to get across was that we are all interconnected. We are not independent entities that just live in my own isolated universe. In fact, this world that we're living in now with COVID, with climate change, with racial injustice, with our whole political turmoil, everything that's going on, all the crises that we're facing right now are ultimately coming down to this question, isn't it? That we cannot live just by satisfying my own needs anymore. That my health and happiness and well-being is so intertwined with that of everybody around me and my community around me. And until we can actually realize that and live in that way, well, who knows where we're headed? It's not pretty. So this is ultimately where mindfulness is leading us. It's not just about me, that we start to realize that what I want for myself is also what everybody else wants for themselves as well. And can we put down our us versus them way of thinking and reach out and take care of each other? Yeah.
This is such a powerful concept, and I wanted to throw in there. I'm assuming everybody knows, about Maslow's hierarchy, right? And
Mhm.
what's so interesting to me is, the top of the pyramid is uh, self-actualization.
Mhm.
Although toward the end of his life, Maslow amended the pyramid and added another piece on top, and it was self-transcendence.
Yes.
And I find
Yes.
that to echo exactly what you're saying. Self-actualization is so much about the self, but there is a piece that's even, um, I think a greater striving, and that is to see ourselves as part of a whole, a community, a world, and to go beyond the self into engaging outwardly and with
Mhm.
with the community. So
Mhm.
I thought was a really interesting discovery I made it, because everybody always thinks about self-actualization, but the fact that when I read about that, I was like, wow,
Yeah.
he saw that.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't stop with me.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So mindfulness is not something to do. I see it as a life affirming path of growth and discovery. And we can start with these little tiny things that we do to take care of me, myself. It has to start there. You can't start anywhere else. You want to be a strong and healthy and happy person yourself. Um, but the more that you engage with mindfulness and have that as an integrated part of the way that you live in this world, these other aspects of self development and self transcendence just start to emerge naturally, because that's what reality keeps throwing in our faces. You can't avoid it if you're really paying attention. So that's my hope and my message to everyone. Um, you can start a meditation practice by putting it on your to-do list. By all means, if that's what'll get you started, great, do it. But don't stop there. And instead, use it as an opportunity to really take in your world around you, yourself, your world, um, and to just keep learning and growing and see where that takes you. It's got to be good places. I can't imagine it being otherwise.